Peter Sullivan had already hired 9 caregivers for his mother, and every one of them had left the house before completing a full week. Some lasted only a day. One lasted less than an hour. That morning, Catherine had been the latest failure. She was 45, highly trained, professionally dressed, and carried a resume filled with private hospitals, international certificates, and years of experience. Peter had paid the agency extra because he was convinced she would finally solve the problem. His mother disagreed. Vivian Sullivan, 70 years old, sat beside the tall window overlooking the tree-lined streets of Charlotte, North Carolina. Since her husband Arthur had died 3 years earlier, she had become quieter, sharper, and increasingly unwilling to let strangers into her life. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," Catherine said. "I'd like to begin by checking your blood pressure." Vivian looked at the medical equipment in her hand. "No." Catherine smiled politely. "It is part of my normal procedure. I had it checked yesterday. I understand, but I need my own baseline." Vivian's expression hardened. "I am a woman sitting in my own living room. I am not your baseline." Peter closed his eyes for a moment. "Mom. Don't mom me. She's trying to help. No, you hired her to supervise me. That isn't fair." Vivian rose slowly with her cane. "You know what isn't fair? Having strangers arrive in my house because my son has decided I'm too old to know what I need." Peter felt the familiar frustration return. "You have unstable blood pressure. You have diabetes. You've fallen twice this year. And yet I'm still standing. I can't be here every day. Because of business. Yes, because of business. Always business." The argument ended exactly as the previous ones had. Catherine quietly gathered her equipment. "I think it would be better if I left." Peter apologized and promised to pay her for the entire day. After the door closed, he looked at his mother. "We cannot keep doing this." Vivian turned toward the window. "Then stop doing it." Peter picked up his briefcase. "There's another candidate coming this afternoon." Vivian said nothing. Driving downtown, Peter tightened his hands around the steering wheel. He ran 3 successful companies. Hundreds of employees depended on his decisions. Investors expected results. His schedule was measured in meetings, flights, contracts, and deadlines. He could solve complicated business problems before breakfast. But he could not solve his mother. The first caregiver had seemed too young. Another talked constantly. Another barely spoke. One cooked badly. Another refused to cook. One treated Vivian like an invalid. Another treated her complaints as jokes. The 8th had irritated her simply by acting as though everything in the house needed reorganizing. Catherine had apparently been too clinical. Peter spent the day working, yet one sentence followed him through every meeting. "You treat me like a burden." It hurt because he loved his mother. But somewhere beneath the hurt was another truth he did not want to examine. He had been trying to manage her. Near 5 o'clock, his longtime housekeeper Megan called. "Mr. Sullivan, the new woman is here." "I forgot. Ask her to wait. I'm leaving now." There was a pause. "Actually, Mrs. Sullivan is already talking to her." Peter straightened. "My mother is interviewing her?" "I suppose you could call it that." That alone made him leave immediately. Vivian had never bothered interviewing anyone. She normally treated each new arrival as Peter's decision, and therefore Peter's problem. When he reached the house, he expected silence. Instead, before he even entered the living room, he heard laughter. His mother's laughter. Peter stopped. He had almost forgotten what it sounded like. Then he walked around the corner and froze. Vivian sat before an old dressing mirror that Megan had apparently brought downstairs. Behind her stood a young woman with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a pale blue blouse. No expensive uniform. No polished badge. She slowly brushed Vivian's silver hair. "My grandmother had hair like yours," the woman said. She refused to diet. Vivian smiled at the mirror. Smart woman. She said every gray hair had cost her something, so she wasn't going to hide them. Vivian laughed again. Exactly. The young woman noticed Peter. You must be Mr. Sullivan. She set the brush down. I'm Faith Turner. Peter knew from the agency file that she was 27. Vivian looked at him with an expression he had not seen in months. Contentment. Peter, Faith is staying. He stared at his mother. You've known her for less than an afternoon. That was enough. Faith smiled awkwardly. Peter looked from one woman to the other. For the first time after 9 failed caregivers, nobody was arguing. And somehow that frightened him more than another failure would have. After Vivian went upstairs to rest, Peter asked Faith to stay. He wanted records, references, background information, anything that would make the strange success of the afternoon understandable. Faith handed him a thin folder. She had studied nursing, but had never graduated. She had spent 5 years working privately with older adults, almost always inside family homes. Her references were excellent. Peter looked up. Why didn't you finish nursing school? My grandmother became sick. You took time off? I left. For how long? Until she died. I cared for her for 2 years. Peter lowered the folder. I'm sorry. Thank you. Faith's sadness was visible, but it had softened with time. My family couldn't afford full-time care. At first I thought leaving school would ruin my future. Later, I realized those 2 years gave me something school couldn't. What? Time with her. Peter looked at the references again. One family described Faith as someone who cared not only for their father, but for everyone around him. What do you charge? Faith told him. Peter frowned. That's far below what the agency charged me for the others. I don't have their qualifications. You have experience. I have experience with people. I'll double it. That isn't necessary. If my mother still wants you here after a week, I'll increase it again. Faith shook her head. Pay me fairly. Nothing more. Peter was accustomed to negotiations, in which everybody wanted something larger, more money, more authority, a better title, a better percentage. Faith seemed almost suspicious of excess. When he warned her that Vivian could be difficult, she stopped him. Your mother isn't difficult. Peter gave her a skeptical look. Faith continued. She's lonely. The words were simple, but they landed harder than criticism. That evening, Peter canceled a business dinner and ate with his mother. For several minutes they spoke about nothing important. Finally, Peter asked the question that had been bothering him. Why Faith? Vivian put down her fork. She listened. So did the others. No, they heard me. Peter waited. There's a difference. They asked about medication, dizziness, food, sleep. Faith asked how I met your father. Peter looked down. She asked what music we liked. What I did before I became somebody's mother. What places I wanted to visit. She asked about my life. Vivian's voice became quieter. People stop asking old people about their lives, Peter. They ask whether we took our pills, whether we used the bathroom, whether something hurts. Eventually you begin to feel like an old machine everyone is trying to keep operating. Peter had no answer. When did I last ask you about Dad? He finally said. Vivian did not respond. She did not have to. Peter swallowed. I'm sorry. His mother reached across the table. I know you love me. Then why does it feel like everything I do is wrong? Because you're trying to fix something that isn't broken. You need help. Yes, but needing help and losing your dignity aren't the same thing. Peter leaned back. Vivian looked toward Arthur's empty chair. When your father died, I lost the person who remembered me before all this. Before the house. Before the companies. Before you were born. He remembered the foolish girl I used to be. She smiled faintly. And then you became busier. Peter felt his chest tighten. Sometimes, Vivian continued, I felt as if I lost both of you. You didn't lose me. You're physically here sometimes. Your mind rarely is. That's not fair. No, it isn't, but it's true. Peter stood, uncomfortable. His father had lived exactly that way. Arthur Sullivan had built the family fortune through relentless work. When he died suddenly from a heart attack, his calendar had still been full for the following 6 months. Vivian watched Peter's face. Your father built an empire. He couldn't carry one piece of it with him. Peter turned away. I don't want to discuss Dad dying. That's another reason I like Faith. She doesn't run away when a conversation becomes painful. Peter went upstairs to the bedroom he had used as a teenager. The furniture was nearly unchanged. His phone showed messages from his assistant about an early meeting. For once, Peter placed it face down. He remembered Faith brushing Vivian's hair. No medical equipment. No charts. No instructions. Just attention. The next morning he came downstairs before Faith arrived. Megan stared at him. You're having breakfast here? I live here sometimes, remember? She smiled. I remember. I wasn't sure you did. Before Peter could answer, Vivian entered already dressed. She looked more energetic than she had in months. At precisely 8 o'clock, the bell rang. Faith arrived carrying a cloth bag filled with pastries from a small neighborhood bakery. My grandmother believed breakfast tasted better when it was shared, she explained. Vivian immediately searched through the bag. This woman understands medicine. Faith laughed. Peter did too. And as the three of them ate together, Peter noticed something he had missed for years. His mother was not asking for more life. She was asking for someone to share the life she still had. Within 2 weeks, the Sullivan house seemed to belong to different people. Vivian began waking early. She dressed with less assistance. She walked with Faith through the garden, watched old films in the afternoon, helped prepare lunch, and took her medication without arguments. Faith never stood over her with a glass of water. She simply placed the pills beside breakfast. Vivian took them. Peter found the transformation almost insulting in its simplicity. He had spent money on specialists, agencies, private consultations, and home equipment. Faith had brought pastries and conversation. Even Megan noticed the difference. Your mother complains less. Maybe Faith hypnotized her. Megan smiled. Maybe your mother finally has something besides herself to think about. Peter began returning home earlier. At first, he told himself it was to monitor the arrangement. Soon he stopped pretending. He wanted to hear Vivian laugh. He wanted to sit at the kitchen table. And increasingly, he wanted to see Faith. One Thursday evening he entered the house and heard music coming from the living room. His father's old records had been untouched since Arthur died. Peter followed the sound. Vivian was dancing. Not quickly, not carelessly. Faith stood beside her, keeping one hand ready near Vivian's arm, as they moved slowly across the rug. You're rushing, Faith teased. I have waited 3 years. I'm allowed to rush. Peter remained in the doorway. His mother saw him. You're home early. I canceled dinner. Good, come dance. No. Faith turned. Why not? Because I don't dance. Vivian laughed. Your father taught you. That was years ago. The body remembers, Faith said. Peter gave her a doubtful look. Vivian held out her hand. Come on, son. There was such hope in her face that he surrendered. Faith changed the music to another old romantic recording Arthur had loved. Peter stepped forward and took his mother's hand. At first he moved stiffly. Then something returned. His father standing behind him when Peter was 15, correcting his steps. Arthur laughing when Peter nearly stepped on his shoe. Vivian clapping from the sofa. The memory was so clear that Peter almost lost the rhythm. His mother squeezed his hand. "Stay here." He understood she meant more than the dance. When the music ended, Vivian hugged him. "Thank you." Peter held her longer than usual. After she went upstairs, Faith began putting the records away. Peter stopped her. "Leave them out." She looked at him. "Your mother wants to dance again next week." "So do I." Faith smiled. "Progress." Peter sat down. "Why do you do this? Dance badly? Care for people?" Faith joined him on the sofa. For a few moments, she was quiet. "When my grandmother was hospitalized, everyone was technically doing their jobs. They checked her numbers, changed things, wrote notes. But nobody knew her. Her voice stayed calm. They didn't know she loved flowers. They didn't know she sang while cooking. They didn't know she drank coffee far too sweet. Eventually I realized they weren't seeing my grandmother. They were seeing an elderly patient in a bed. So you took her home." Faith nodded. "I promised myself that whenever I cared for someone after that, I would remember the person before the illness." Peter watched her. "That sounds exhausting." "Sometimes. Why keep doing it?" "Because being seen matters." Later, Peter asked if she wanted dinner. Faith agreed under one condition. "You cook." Peter laughed. "My mother has been spreading propaganda. She says your father taught you. He taught me pasta. Then pasta." They worked side by side. Peter chopped tomatoes while Faith prepared garlic and herbs. The kitchen slowly filled with the smell of sauce. They talked. Faith told him about her mother, who cleaned houses, her mechanic father who had died years earlier, and her two younger brothers. Peter spoke about Arthur. "My father believed working hard solved everything." "Did it?" Peter looked at the knife in his hand. "It made him successful." "That wasn't my question." Peter smiled without humor. "No, it didn't." Faith leaned against the counter. "You don't have to repeat his entire life just because you inherited his companies." Peter looked at her. Nobody in his business world would have dared say that. "What changed?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "You've been coming home earlier," Peter answered before thinking. "You." Faith became still. Peter quickly continued. "What you did for Mom. You made me notice things." Faith studied him, then smiled. "You still have time, Peter." That sentence stayed with him. Still have time. After dinner, Faith went home. Peter stood at the front door after she disappeared down the drive. Vivian's voice came from behind him. "You like her?" Peter turned. "Mom, I'm 70, not blind. She works for us. Your father was my boss when we met." Peter stared at her. "You never told me that." "You never asked." Vivian smiled. Then she said something Peter would remember for the rest of his life. "When someone makes you want to become a better version of yourself, pay attention." Peter did pay attention. He noticed how Faith greeted Megan before asking about Vivian, how she never finished Vivian's sentences even when it took the older woman time to find a word, how she knew when to help and, more importantly, when not to help. He noticed her laugh. He noticed how peaceful the house felt when she was there. That frightened him. Faith was his mother's employee. Peter controlled her salary and could influence her livelihood. Whatever he felt, he knew he could not behave as though that power did not exist. So he kept his distance. Mostly. One Monday he returned early and found Faith and Vivian kneeling beside a garden bed. Vivian had dirt on both hands. Peter stared. "You told me your knees hurt too much for gardening." "They still hurt." "Then why are you on the ground?" "Because apparently flowers are more persuasive than my son." Faith handed him a small shovel. "Help us." They were planting daisies. Peter loosened the soil while Vivian complained about his technique. "You run 3 companies and can't dig a straight hole." I didn't realize there was an executive standard for holes. There should be. Faith laughed. When they finished, Vivian went inside to rest, deliberately leaving them alone. Peter sat in the grass. Your grandmother taught you gardening too. Most things worth knowing. Tell me about her. Faith looked surprised. Then she sat beside him. Her name was Rose. She raised 5 children after my grandfather died. She cleaned houses for most of her life. Was she happy? She didn't have an easy life. That isn't the same answer. Faith smiled. You're learning. She looked at the row of daisies. She was happy more often than people with twice what she had. Her house was always crowded. Someone was eating, arguing, singing, borrowing something. She used to say, wealth was measured by how many people felt safe knocking on your door. Peter thought about his enormous house. Before Faith arrived, hardly anyone knocked without an appointment. When Rose became ill, Faith continued, I was in my 2nd year of nursing school. I thought I knew what my future looked like. And then you chose her. Yes. Did you ever regret it? No. Not once? I regretted being afraid. I regretted having no money. I regretted losing her. But staying? Never. Faith picked some soil from her sleeve. My boyfriend at the time thought I had ruined my life. Peter's attention sharpened. You had a boyfriend? Faith laughed. That's what you heard? I'm gathering context. He left. Because you cared for your grandmother? He said I had no ambition. Peter shook his head. He sounds like an idiot. That was eventually my conclusion. They laughed together. Peter wanted to say more. Instead, he asked, Are you seeing anyone now? Faith tilted her head. That is remarkably subtle. Sorry. No. Peter's heart moved much faster than a mature businessman's heart should have moved over one syllable. Faith looked at him. Are you? No. Too busy? Probably. Or hiding. Peter was quiet. Faith stood. I should check on Vivian. That evening, Vivian confronted him. You're going to tell her. Tell her what? Peter. He sighed. She works for me. Then handle that responsibly. How? Be honest. Make it clear she owes you nothing. Her employment cannot depend on her answer. If she says no, you accept it, and never punish her for it. Peter looked at his mother. You've thought about this. I raised you. I've been thinking ahead of you since the day you were born. For several days, Peter tried to find the right moment. There never seemed to be one. Then on Friday afternoon, Vivian was asleep, and Megan had gone shopping. Faith stood alone outside, watering the daisies. Peter walked toward her. You're early again, she said. I've been developing a bad habit. Coming home? Apparently. Faith set down the watering can. Peter took a breath. I need to tell you something. Her expression changed. Is Vivian all right? Yes. This is about us. Faith became very still. Peter forced himself not to hide behind humor. I care about you. She said nothing. I know I'm your employer. That's exactly why I need to say this carefully. Nothing about your work changes because of what you say next. You don't owe me a date. You don't owe me feelings. If you want me never to mention this again, I won't. Faith watched him. But I think about you, Peter continued. I look forward to seeing you, and I would like the chance to know you outside this house. Silence stretched between them. Peter's courage began collapsing. Then Faith smiled. I was wondering how long this would take. Peter blinked. What? I care about you too. The relief nearly made him laugh. Faith looked toward the mansion. I kept telling myself it was impossible. We come from completely different lives. I don't care where you grew up. You may someday. Then judge me someday. Not today. Faith laughed softly. Peter held out his hand. Dinner? Somewhere away from here? No employment discussion. Faith looked at his hand, then placed hers in it. Dinner. Behind an upstairs curtain, Vivian quietly stepped away from the window. She had seen enough, and she was smiling. Peter and Faith did not rush. He insisted that another agency handle the administrative side of Vivian's care, so Faith would no longer report directly to him. Her pay and position were protected, regardless of what happened between them. Only then did they begin seeing each other openly. Their first weeks together were simple. Coffee after Faith finished work. Walks through Freedom Park. Small dinners where Peter discovered that Faith preferred neighborhood restaurants to places that required reservations weeks ahead. Vivian often joined them. She claimed she was preventing Peter from becoming boring. Faith claimed the job was impossible. One evening, after Vivian went upstairs, Peter showed Faith something he had hidden from almost everyone. Sketchbooks. Inside were drawings of homes, public buildings, gardens, and community spaces. Faith turned the pages slowly. "You made these?" Peter nodded. "They're beautiful. I wanted to study architecture. Why didn't you?" "My father expected me to study business." Faith looked at him. "And now? Now I own 3 companies I never dreamed about owning. Do you hate them?" "No. That would be easier. I'm good at what I do. People depend on me. But being good at something isn't always the same as loving it." Faith closed the sketchbook. "Then don't abandon this." Peter smiled. "You tell everyone what to do? Only stubborn people. What about you?" "What about me? You wanted to become a nurse." Faith looked toward the stairs. "I still think about going back." "Then go. It isn't that simple. Nothing important is." Faith gave him a suspicious smile. "You stole that from me. I'm learning from an excellent teacher." Not long afterward, Peter told Faith he loved her. It happened in the kitchen. He had brought flowers. Vivian was peeling potatoes at the table and refused to leave. "I've survived 70 years, she said. "I deserve entertainment." Faith laughed. Peter ignored his mother as best he could. "I know this has happened quickly," he told Faith. "But my life was moving quickly long before you arrived. It was just moving in the wrong direction." Faith's eyes filled. "I love you." Vivian stopped peeling. Faith looked at Peter for a long moment. "I love you too." Vivian placed both hands on the table. "Thank goodness. Now can we finish dinner?" Their happiness grew quietly. Then came the afternoon in the park. Vivian stopped walking. One hand went to her chest. Faith reacted immediately. "Vivian, sit down." Peter saw his mother's face turn pale. "I'm dizzy," she whispered. Faith checked her, found the medication in Vivian's bag, and asked Peter to call for help. At the hospital, doctors said Vivian's blood pressure had risen dangerously and wanted to monitor her overnight. Peter sat beside the bed, blaming himself.
"I stopped paying attention."
Faith took his hand. "No. I became comfortable. You became her son again instead of her guard. And look what happened. She has a medical condition, Peter. Loving her does not give you control over every bad day." His mother slept, while monitors quietly marked the passing hours. Peter lowered his voice. "I'm afraid she'll die." Faith did not offer him a false promise. Instead, she said, "You will lose her someday." Peter looked at her sharply. "So will I. So will everyone who loves someone." His eyes filled. "What am I supposed to do with that?" "Don't waste the time before it happens." Faith moved her chair closer. "Vivian told me something last week. Her greatest fear isn't dying." "What is it?" "That after she's gone, you'll disappear into work again." Peter looked toward his sleeping mother. "She thinks I'll do that. She knows grief can make people return to old hiding places. I won't." Faith squeezed his hand. "Then prove her wrong by how you live, not by what you promise tonight." The next morning, Vivian woke feeling better. On the ride home, she sat between Peter and Faith in the back seat. She looked at her son. "I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For finally learning that being present is not the same as being available by phone." Then she turned to Faith. "And you?" Faith smiled. "What did I do?" "You gave me my son back." Faith shook her head. "He came back himself." Vivian took both their hands. "Then make sure neither of you forgets the road home." 3 months passed. Vivian recovered well. She still needed medication and regular medical care, but her days were no longer organized around illness. Peter changed too. He delegated more responsibility to trusted executives. He reduced unnecessary travel and stopped treating every meeting as an emergency. At first, several partners worried. Then, something unexpected happened. The companies continued functioning. Peter realized he had spent years believing that everything would collapse if he stepped away. It did not. His assistant, Daniel, even told him, "You're easier to work with now." "That sounds like criticism." "It is." Peter laughed. He started drawing again. Some evenings he sat at the long dining table with pencils and paper while Faith practiced guitar nearby. Vivian listened from her chair. One night she said, "This house finally sounds occupied." Peter looked around. She was right. Months earlier, the rooms had been perfectly maintained and emotionally empty. Now there were guitar strings, unfinished drawings, half-read books, gardening gloves, photographs, and occasional arguments about dinner. Life had made a mess. Peter loved it. One Friday afternoon, he came home carrying a small box in his jacket. He found Faith and Vivian watching an old movie. "Can I interrupt?" Vivian paused the television. "Depends. Is this interesting?" Peter looked at Faith. "I hope so." He sat in front of her and took her hands. Faith stared at him. "Peter? When you came here, I thought I was hiring someone to solve a problem." Vivian quietly reached for a tissue. Peter continued, "You didn't solve my mother. She never needed solving. You helped me see her again." Faith's eyes filled. "And then you did the same thing to me." Peter took out the box. "You saw parts of me I had forgotten. The son, the man who draws, the man who likes making dinner, the man who can leave his phone in another room without the world ending." Faith laughed through tears. "I want to keep learning who that man is with you." He opened the box. The ring was simple white gold with a small diamond. "Faith Turner, will you marry me?" Faith covered her mouth. Vivian began crying before Faith answered. "Oh, say something," Vivian complained. "I'm old. I don't have unlimited patience." Faith laughed. "Yes." Peter's shoulders dropped with relief. "Yes? Yes, Peter." He placed the ring on her hand. Vivian embraced them both. "I knew it." Peter looked at her. "You say that about everything after it happens." "I knew this before it happened." That evening they invited Faith's family. Her mother, Frances, arrived nervous about entering such an expensive home. She kept adjusting her dress and offering to help Megan in the kitchen. Vivian stopped her. "You worked all day?" "Yes." "Then sit down. Tonight our children are doing the worrying." That broke the tension. Faith's brothers, Ethan and Owen, were in college. Faith had quietly helped pay their expenses for years. Peter learned more about what her family had sacrificed. Frances learned that the millionaire she had feared meeting could burn garlic, lose arguments to his mother, and become embarrassingly sentimental whenever Faith entered the room. By dessert, both families were laughing. After everyone left, Faith and Peter walked outside. The daisies they had planted months earlier were blooming. Faith looked at her ring beneath the porch light. "I'm scared." Peter stopped. "Of marrying me?" "Not exactly." Comforting. She smiled. "Sometimes I wonder whether you'll wake up and see how different our lives were before this. I already see it. And I'm grateful." Faith looked down. I never finished school. My mother cleans houses. Your family name is on buildings. Peter turned her toward him. None of that tells me who you are. What does? The things you do when nobody is impressed. Faith's eyes filled again. You stayed with your grandmother. You cared for your brothers. You treated my mother like a person when everyone else treated her like a responsibility. That is who I'm marrying. Faith rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder. The following morning, Peter proposed another change. I want you to stop working as Mom's paid caregiver. Faith frowned. She still needs help. We'll arrange whatever medical assistance she needs. But you shouldn't have to become my wife while remaining my employee. Faith considered that. What would I do? Whatever you choose. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. I want to finish nursing school. Peter smiled. And after that? I want to create something for families caring for older people. Not a hospital, something warmer, a place where people are known by their names and stories. I'll fund it. No. Peter sighed. I knew you were going to say that. I want to build it, not receive it. Then, we become partners. Faith considered him. You handle buildings and money. You handle everything important. Equal partners. Peter held out his hand. Equal partners. Vivian entered the kitchen just in time to see them shake. What are you two plotting? Our future, Faith said. Vivian poured herself coffee. Good. Make it big enough for me. 2 months later, Peter and Faith married in the garden. They invited family, close friends, Megan, Daniel, several people Faith had cared for over the years, and a few employees who had known Peter long enough to recognize how much he had changed. The ceremony was small despite Peter's wealth. Faith wanted daisies. Vivian insisted the original flower bed remain untouched. That's where the trouble started, she told guests. Faith wore a simple white dress. Peter wore gray. Frances sat beside Vivian in the front row. Both women cried before the ceremony even began. When Faith walked toward him, Peter remembered the first afternoon he had seen her. Jeans. A plain blouse. A wooden hairbrush in her hand. No dramatic promises. No impressive speech. She had simply treated Vivian as though her remaining years mattered. Now that simple act had led them here. After they exchanged vows, Peter danced with Faith beneath strings of lights. Later, he danced with Vivian. She moved more slowly than she had months earlier. Peter adjusted his pace. You're slowing down for me, she said. I'm learning. I noticed. He smiled. Are you happy? Vivian looked toward Faith, who was laughing with her brothers. Very. Peter held his mother a little closer. So am I. Several months after the wedding, Faith returned to school. Peter resumed serious architectural study in his spare time while remaining involved in his companies. Together, they began planning a small residential care foundation outside Charlotte. Faith refused to call residents patients unless medical necessity required it. Every intake form included questions about favorite songs, former occupations, family traditions, foods, fears, stories, and things the person still hoped to do. Megan eventually joined the project as community coordinator. Daniel helped Peter restructure his schedule so the businesses no longer depended on constant intervention. Frances volunteered at weekend family meals. Vivian became the foundation's unofficial critic. Too much beige, she announced the first time Peter showed her his design. It's calming. It's depressing. Faith sided with Vivian. Peter lost. The walls became warmer. Years later, Peter would understand that the most important change in his life had begun long before the wedding, long before the proposal, even before he admitted he loved Faith. It began when his mother refused to cooperate. For months, he had believed Vivian was being unreasonable. He had judged every rejection as another obstacle he needed to overcome. He had money, access, and solutions. Surely enough expertise could force the situation into order. But age had not taken Vivian's identity away. Loneliness had only buried it. Faith uncovered it, because she did something Peter had forgotten how to do. She became curious about another human being. One autumn evening, years after Faith first entered the Sullivan house, Peter sat in the garden beside Vivian. Her hair was whiter now. Faith had recently brushed it the same way she had on that first afternoon. The daisies had spread beyond their original row. Children from visiting families were playing near the porch while Faith spoke with a woman whose elderly father had just entered their care program. Peter's phone vibrated. He looked at it, then placed it face down. Vivian noticed. "That took you long enough." Peter smiled. "I'm still learning. You always will be." He looked at his mother. "Do you remember Catherine? The woman with the blood pressure machine? You frightened her. She frightened me first." Peter laughed. "And the others? Some were perfectly nice. You rejected all of them." "I did." "Why?" Vivian took time before answering. "Because everybody arrived knowing what I needed before they knew who I was." Peter looked toward Faith. "And she didn't." "No." Faith arrived asking questions. Vivian rested both hands on her cane. "She didn't save me, Peter. People like telling stories that way because it sounds beautiful. The young woman comes into an old woman's life and saves her." She shook her head. "I was still myself. I was grieving. I was angry. I was lonely. She simply made enough room for me to become visible again." Those words stayed with Peter. As he grew older, he understood them more deeply. He had once believed love was proved through provision: a larger house, better doctors, more money, greater security. All those things had value, but none could replace attention. He had given his mother everything that could be purchased, while withholding the one thing she wanted from him: unhurried time. Growing older taught him that the most painful form of loneliness was not always having nobody nearby. Sometimes it was sitting among people who had stopped asking who you were. Families could become so focused on keeping an aging parent safe that they forgot safety was not the entire purpose of being alive. A body could be protected while a spirit slowly disappeared from the conversation. Faith had understood something Peter learned only after almost losing the chance to learn it at all. Dignity often lived in small choices: letting Vivian select her own clothes, asking which record she wanted to hear, waiting for her answer instead of answering for her, brushing her hair because tenderness mattered even when no medical chart could measure it, sitting at breakfast without checking a phone. Peter also learned that regret was useful only when it changed tomorrow. He could have spent years condemning himself for being absent after Arthur died. Instead, Faith taught him to be grateful that Vivian was still there. There was still another dinner to attend, another story to hear, another dance to share. Many people discovered the value of presence only after the chair across from them was permanently empty. Success had not been Peter's enemy. Work had not been evil. His mistake had been treating achievement as though it could wait for nothing, while assuming love always could. Love could wait. People often did. Until one day they could not. That realization changed the way Peter measured a good life. He no longer counted only contracts signed, companies expanded, or money earned. He counted evenings when everyone stayed at the table too long. He counted his mother's stories, Faith's music, arguments that ended in laughter, flowers returning after winter, and doors that family members could open without appointments. Vivian had once told him that his father carried none of his empire with him when he died. Peter finally understood what Arthur had carried: the people who remembered him, the meals, the dances, the ordinary afternoons, the love he had managed to give before time ran out. Peter looked at Faith across the garden. She caught his eye and smiled. Vivian followed his gaze. "You chose well," she said. Peter shook his head. "No, Mom." He took his mother's hand. "You did." Vivian laughed, and Peter listened carefully, knowing that someday he would miss that sound more than anything money had ever bought.